You know, if you're not careful to interpret your culture through the lens of Christianity, you will interpret your Christianity through the lens of your culture. And that's what's happening right here. Us American Christians can be particularly guilty of this in conflating American rights, values, and ideas with Christian ones. So take the right to bear arms, for instance. That is an American right, not a Christian right. So right now, there's a national conversation about guns and weaponry going on, and this verse, Luke 22:36, gets thrown around. And we're going to address why this is bad exegesis, and then we're going to talk about the historic Christian teaching on self-defense and violent response to violence. So first, Luke 22:36. Whenever you reference scripture, you should be careful to note the context of the verses immediately preceding and following your verse. So in this instance, verse 37 makes it quite clear that Jesus' intention here is not to give a blanket command for Christians to arm themselves over the course of all of the following history. Instead, he is fulfilling prophecy. Very specifically, he quotes Isaiah 53:12 and is talking about his purpose in fulfilling prophecy being counted among the lawless. And obviously, if you think about it, it makes sense. I mean, if he was giving a blanket command to armament and self-defense, that would run pretty counter to his words of Matthew 5, where he says not to resist an evildoer, to turn the other cheek, to give additional goods to the one who robs you, and to offer additional aid to those who force your labor. Our American faith has become pretty detached on the topic of violence and appropriate response to it from ancient Christianity. For the ancient Christians, the idea of self-defense was out of the question. I mean, think about it. 11 of the 12 apostles were martyred. The ancient church overall was largely persecuted. There was no armed rebellion or insurrection. However, if they had an American frame of mind, things may have turned out very differently and not necessarily for better. Augustine, in the 5th century, early 5th century, did formulate what would come to be known as just war theory. Ambrose of Milan contributed some to these ideas as well, which did argue for the rightfulness of the defense of innocents, like women and children. But self-defense? No. In his letter to Publica, Augustine wrote, "As to killing others in order to defend one's own life, I do not approve of this unless one happens to be a soldier or public functionary acting not for himself, but in defense of others." 800 years later, Thomas Aquinas similarly says it is not lawful for a man to intend killing a man in self-defense except for such as have public authority. It's worth noting he allows for the accidental killing in self-defense, but not intending to kill. So this matters because when we detach this thread from Christianity, we kind of neuter it. Like, the power of Christianity is in the radical unnaturalness of what Christ commands us to. So I'll follow this up with a couple of stories of that radical love in action.